All right, I'll call our November 18th, 2014 Planning Commission meeting to order. Kathy, will you take roll?
Chair Adams.
Here.
Commissioner Stewart.
Here.
Commissioner Olivers.
Here.
Commissioner Jordison.
Here.
Commissioner Holland.
Here.
Commissioner Tisdall.
Here.
Okay, Kathy gave us the meeting minutes from our November 4th, 2014 meeting. Any comments or revisions related to the typed up meeting minutes? No? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes as proposed?
I'd move their approval with the corrections presented at places.
Oh. Thank you. And we do have corrections that we've received prior. That's right. Okay, so motions for to approve the revised copy of the meeting minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Kathy?
Commissioner Tisdall.
Yes.
Commissioner Holland.
Yes.
Commissioner Jordison.
Yes.
Commissioner Olivers.
Yes.
Commissioner Stewart. Yes. Chair Adams.
Yes. Thank you, Claire, for that correction. I would have gone right over the top of that. All right. As we've done at other Planning Commission meetings, we start with our member reports, or commissioner reports. Commissioner Tisdale, do you have anything?
I continue to work on Housing Hopes. Got a group that they've put together where Ed is discussing the TOD, or Transportation Oriented Development, down by
Everett Station.
Everett Station, thank you. And that's progressing along, and it's kind of interesting, and discussions are getting someplace. And then the week before, I attended the Clean Tech Conference, and that was pretty interesting. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about here with sidewalks and bike paths and walking paths and separations and things like that were pretty interesting. And pollution is tailpipes and wood stove smoke and things. So it was just kind of interesting to see what's going on and all the innovations that are out there to get ready for.
Nothing for me tonight, thanks.
No report?
No report tonight.
No report.
All right. I just have a brief report. The task force for the Streets Initiative wrapped up its process last week, and yesterday I saw the final report that came out that will be presented to the City Council tomorrow night. So tomorrow night, Sylvia Anderson and myself will be presenting that report to the City Council, and we'll see how that goes. And then from there, we'll have an implementation team that will be put in place. David Hall from the city is going to be leading that, and we'll be assembling that team in the coming weeks and reporting back to the task force in 6 months and at 12 months. So I'll keep you apprised of what happens, but I encourage you to read the report and feel free to ask me any questions about it. It certainly ties in particular to the discussion we're having tonight around housing. So a lot of the issues that come through came through that task force also come through this planning commission. So feel free to let me know if you have any questions about what we did. So thanks.
Thank you.
David, Alan, any report?
Alan Giffen, Planning Director. A couple of weeks ago, City Council did take action on 2 items that the Planning Commission had recommended. One was on the B3 wall signs, that code amendment, and they made a few tweaks to that. One had to do with providing notice to surrounding property owners if the sign was located within 400 feet of a residential zone. That was one that we had talked about, but the commission didn't add to the recommendation of the City Council. The council wanted to provide that notice. Some other tweaks regarding the lighting, and I can't remember what what the technical details were of that off the top of my head, but a little bit more specificity in the illumination section. They also made changes to, or approved, but with changes, the recommendation to the amend the ordinance related to the student housing for Trinity Lutheran College. They were concerned, a couple of members in particular, about allowing the housing to convert to micro-housing units. So we added some language that required any conversion to be, to meet the definition of multifamily housing in the event that they couldn't utilize it for student housing. And unless there had been some policy discussion and a change in our regulations to allow for micro-housing. So that was the change that they made to that one.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from the commission on either of those? Okay. As we've done in the past, we provide an opportunity for anyone who attends a planning commission meeting to talk to us about an issue that's not on the agenda tonight. We have one item on the agenda, so if you have signed up to talk to that, we'll get to that in a moment. But is there anyone who would like to address the planning commission at this point? All right, hearing none, we will go ahead and move forward with the meeting. The one item we have on the agenda tonight is a workshop on the Everett housing profile prepared for the 2015 to 2035 comprehensive plan. And I assume, Dave and Alan, I'm turning this over to you.
I'm going to introduce it. We have Christina Gallant here, who's is the primary author of the report, and she'll make a presentation. But I wanted to put it in perspective first, in sense of the housing element is one that gets a lot of interest because housing as a issue is a very strong issue in the community in the sense of affordability, and then how we as a community grow in the future and what our existing inventory is. Under the Growth Management Act, the housing element is one of the mandatory elements that we're supposed to address in our comprehensive plan and have from the very beginning of the Growth Management Act in the early 1990s. Part of what we're supposed to do there is put an inventory and analysis together of the existing and projected housing needs that are and identify housing units necessary to manage protected growth. In part, this is talking about cost of housing and the report that we have and housing needs. We've also, Mary Cunningham gave an extensive presentation on how we can, as a community, in the different alternatives, accept housing units in the sense of what can be built. She didn't get into what type of housing units from the standpoint if they should be for low income or higher income individuals, but just talked about our capacity and such. So we've done some work on that and presented that to you in the past. Some other things that the housing element includes is a statement of goals, policy, and objectives, and which could look at things like preservation of housing, improvement and development of housing over time, including single-family residences. And as you know, as a planning commission, the information we've given you is we as a community, and we grow in the future, most of the housing that we will see in our community will be multiple family in nature to accommodate the growth that we're asking for. There's only so much land for single-family homes and townhouses, a single-family attached product. And so on the other issue that the housing element is supposed to look at is sufficient land for housing that is not limited to, but it could be government-assisted housing, housing for low-income families, manufactured housing, multiple family, group homes, and foster care facilities or group home type things. And then also adequate provisions for existing and projected needs of all economic segments, and that's what this housing report does. We also then relate this back to stepping back to the regional vision. Vision 2040 has been showing more interest in housing, and then also the PSRC, Puget Sound Regional Council, had shown more interest in transit-oriented development, meaning having more housing near transit locations so people can live in a location where they then can rely less on a car and more on public transportation. So the Puget Sound Regional Council, in their Vision 2040, have also looked at housing and housing for all economic segments. The county then also countywide planning policies asked for under HO5, which is the Housing Policy 5, to develop a report, which we all worked on as cities, and it talked about and looked at various cities in the county and how housing had been done over time. And that report was completed, and we've provided that to you in the past. If you don't have a copy of it, we can get you a copy. So that's the countywide planning policy that we also look to and get some direction from, and that's based on the regional. We also have, as a part of our city, we receive directly community development block grant funds, which are funds to help low-income people in the community. We also receive some money through the county, which are called home funds that are used for housing, and some housing trust fund monies from when people file things at the county. There's a filing fee. A portion of that filing fee goes to housing and homeless issues. We receive some of that money, and so we help fund some programs for low income. That consolidated plan, we're in the process of updating that also, but that's where we talk specifically about how we are going to serve low income with the money that's available from the federal government. And when developers of low income housing, be it for-profit, nonprofit, or housing authorities, what they propose need to be consistent with that consolidated plan. And it just so happens that consolidated plan is due for update. So we're right now also going through the public process for updating that document. And that document deals specifically with those HUD programs and other programs that are out there that help people provide housing to low-income people. Even though in the downturn, and I know if you haven't had a chance to look at the report, what I found amazing, we had the economic downturn, and in the city, like in other places, the average housing prices went down, and there was a benefit to that, and that people could, the median income to purchase a home went down in the community. Is now going back up, but there was a dramatic shift in housing costs and what it costs an individual to purchase a home. Both prices went down and interest rates were down, so it was kind of the sweet spot for home ownership if you were going to purchase. But still, having said that and seeing that prices went down, we really didn't see that much in rents going down. And we also didn't see a response in the sense of that homelessness and people in the street and people who are hurting in the sense of being cost burdened and spending more than 30% of their income on housing didn't reduce during that time period. So we still have a lot of people who need affordable housing besides in spite of, I should say, the housing prices going down and people able to purchase homes with less annual income they had years before. So a combination of the interest rates and what prices were going for. I'm going to stop there and have Christina come up and give background on the report, and then staff will be here for questions.
Thanks, Dave. Just a minute here while I pull up my PowerPoint.
Well, before she starts, let me explain what the Housing Alliance is, Alliance for Housing Affordability. There's several organizations, because housing is such an integral part of our society, and it's such an important thing as part of our planning efforts. It came out of Snohomish County tomorrow to try to get the cities to work together on housing issues. And so there was a report done several years ago about trying to work together. And what the result was is the cities and the county formed what's called the Alliance for Housing Affordability, AHA. And it's a group that now is staffed by Christina and member organizations. City of Everett is a member, Snohomish County got together and to have someone focus attention and allowed for cities to work together on housing affordability issues. This is the first effort as a part of that, in the sense of working and doing a housing profile for each member community. Not all cities are members, most are in Snohomish County. And so we're not unique in the sense of having a report like this. Each community who's involved, Marysville, Linwood, others, will also have reports like this being developed, so as part of their comprehensive plan update. So there's a coordinated effort by the cities to provide the same information to help develop their comprehensive plan housing elements. So.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me out tonight. Again, my name is Christina Gallant. I am the Alliance for Housing Affordability Analyst, officially over at the Housing Authority of Snohomish County, but really I work for the Alliance itself. So Dave gave a really great introduction, but today I'm here to just reintroduce our work, introduce myself personally and what I'm here and able to do for you. Go through a couple of the general housing concepts that come up throughout the profile, and then walk through the profile itself, just hitting the major points. Of course, it goes into a lot more detail, so there'll be plenty of time at the end to get into things further or explain things as we're going, but feel free to stop me along the way if anything needs to be clarified. So the Alliance officially got up and going almost exactly a year ago, and in the past year, our major project has been the housing profiles. So I've prepared them for all 13 of our member cities now, and then we're going to do a profile of a different sort for the county finishing up this winter. So the idea, as Dave said again, we're this collaborative body, so we're starting with this initial conditions phase, I think of it, and then I'm going to be supporting the cities in various ways through their housing element updates. And then moving forward, it'll shift to be more of can provide technical assistance to the cities as needed. I'm not a housing advocate. I'm essentially supposed to serve as another member of staff to provide information as needed, help interpret it, offer some examples of how things can be approached. And then also the Alliance is intended to serve as this sort of venue for housing issues, different unique projects as they come up, exploring them as a group to see how things can move forward and how we can work together. So with all of that, moving on to a little bit more context, again, getting back to the Alliance's intent and where we're coming from and kind of what inspired the profile format. Is the idea that, of course, all of the cities aren't housing providers themselves, and there are a lot of different considerations for housing planning and housing suitability for each city. So we're looking at diverse needs and preferences, different family types, different age groups, and how those demographics change over time, adequacy and safety, proximity to transportation, and of course, affordability. And so when I refer to affordability, I'm not just referring to subsidized housing. That's also, referring more generally to this concept of cost burden, that households aren't spending more than 30% of their income for rent or their home ownership costs. So of course, some households can essentially choose to be cost burdened. So in general, we're most concerned with those cost burdened lower income households where they might be making sacrifices, provided, of course, there are options available for the higher income households as well. So moving on, throughout the profile, I'll also refer to a lot of different set household income levels. And this is following a lot of standards, a lot of HUD standards. And so the benchmarks that I use can seem a little odd, but they're just benchmarks for consistency between different programs. So those income levels are set with regards to area median income. And throughout the report, I use a regional area median income that includes King and Snohomish counties. So it's higher even than Snohomish County's median income. But again, it's just to serve as a benchmark, because when we talk about a lot of the subsidized housing programs, and I'll talk about the populations that those serve, that data is all referencing the HUD numbers. So to be consistent, I just use it for everything. So the thing to focus on is in those benchmarks, who can afford what and what's available. So in Everett, we see this graph on the right is comparing the income distribution of Everett with Snohomish County, using all of those income levels. And this isn't adjusting for household size. So while you do see a higher concentration in the lower categories, and Everett does have a lower median income, which we'll get to, households here also tend to be a little smaller. So that's going to affect that distribution as well. So just another thing to keep in mind. And then to put that in context, thinking of those benchmarks and what they really mean in Snohomish County, this is just taking some average incomes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for the area and sorting them out into those income groups. So especially focusing on extremely low and very low income, just to stress that there are a lot of people working at in those levels. You've got, of course, your minimum wage workers, childcare workers, food service employees in the extremely low category. And then in the very low category, you see teachers, medical assistants, security guards, et cetera. And then expanding further to see which of these cost burden is in these income levels. That was an interesting way to say that. Everett's extremely low income households, 79% are cost burdened. That's including renters and owners. At the very low income level, 61%. And you'll notice there's a dramatic improvement for the income levels above very low, bumping up to 38% for low and down to 14% for middle, which we see generally in almost every city I've worked with. Above very low income is where cost burden really starts to improve. That's the level where the market starts to provide housing more adequately. So now, moving on to the profile itself. So the profile model itself was developed with this kind of broad focus idea to combine as much data as possible on demographic and housing information for all of the cities, to provide this kind of detailed view of what are the spectrums of people, what's the spectrum of people living in this city, what's the spectrum of housing, and where are those meeting adequately. So we're using primarily American Community Survey 5-year estimates for a lot of the demographic data. We also have specialized data from Dupree and Scott on rents in the area, a lot of assessors data on home sales, and a lot of data from the housing authorities as well, both HASCO and EHA. So most of the information, and this table of contents isn't from Everett's profile, it's just an image I grabbed from another one, I think. So most of the information is contained in these two major sections. One is the population and community, and the second is existing housing stock. So first looking at the demographics, and then looking at the housing stock, both market rate and subsidized. And the information is presented both narrative form, there's lots of maps at the end, lots of graphs. So moving on to some of the, and again, just hitting on a lot of the high-level major details. So of course, we're getting into a lot more detail in the profile. So that first section, population, community, some of the details in Everett. Of course, on the right here, your growth graph, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, showing really strong projected growth by the county through 2035, which of course, as Dave mentioned, is going to be quite difficult to accommodate, and really is going to mean a lot more redevelopment, a lot more multifamily development. Another big factor here, you have 2.12 jobs per occupied home. And one of the few cities in the county that has a surplus. The county itself doesn't have a surplus. But at the same time, 51% of your local employees do work outside the city. Median income is lower than the county at $47,491. The county's around $68,000. But households are also slightly smaller on average here. Compared to the county, it's 2 point, did I not include the overall average? Comparing renters and owners here, it's 2.3 versus 2.5 on average for renters and owners in Everett, which are both smaller and a little closer together compared to the county overall, which is 2.4 to 2.7 between renters and owners. So both slightly smaller households and less difference between your renter and owner households compared to some other places. And then looking at cost burden across all income levels, 52% of your renters and 40% of your homeowners are cost burdened. And we'll just expand that here. So this is breaking down cost burden by income level, middle and below, by tenure and also overall. So we're seeing again that really significant improvement above 50% AMI. It's always particularly stark for the renters. But your cost burden numbers are always either pretty close to the county averages or a little better. In general, you're pretty even there, with really significant reduction in cost burden for renters as you approach middle income. So moving on to that second section, existing housing stock. In general, you've got a higher concentration of older homes compared to the county, which is shown in this graph on the right. But at the same time, also a more even distribution, more age diversity than in lots of other cities that either have a heavy concentration of older homes or mid-century homes or a really heavy concentration of new homes, which is positive for seeing that redevelopment happen. Redevelopable properties come up on a more even pace over time. An overall split almost evenly between single-family and multifamily homes, 49% single-family, it's about 48 multifamily with the remainder in manufactured homes, 55% renter-occupied. And then looking at, this is a bigger factor in other places, but a pretty even match for your smaller households. 58% of your homes are 2 bedrooms or less in size, while 66% of your households 1 to 2 people, showing a bit of a deficit there, but in other cities it's more like half the amount of small units compared to small households. So pretty close to just matching that. The 2012 median home sale at just under $220,000. Estimated affordability using a number of factors there to require about $52,000 in annual income, which while it's above your local median income, for home ownership it's pretty good. In 2012, nearly all of your home sales were theoretically affordable to households earning at least 80% AMI. But there was a really significant improvement from 2008 to 2012. With really, really big improvement in home ownership opportunities for moderate income households, which of course we expect to retreat as the ownership, the market continues to improve. And looking at the assessed value numbers, we're seeing that increase. So the 2014 average assessed value in Everett did increase slightly over 2013, a little below the rate countywide. But still improving, and the recessionary drop wasn't actually as bad in Everett as it was in some other communities. So, going on to the market rate rental housing, lots of numbers here, but on the left, that's just a graph showing the average rents by size, minimum, and then the minimum hourly wage to afford that unit, the average unit. And on the right here, it's just looking at by size, what income levels are those averages affordable to? And when I'm saying limited, that means that we are finding rents affordable to that income level, but it's just going to be a limited supply. So in general, rents in Everett are affordable typically to at least households earning at least 50% AMI, low and above. This is assuming that households are going to be living in units that are appropriately sized for them, so not choosing to live in homes that are bigger than they may need or smaller than they may need. But of course, there are a lot of extenuating circumstances that can make things like that happen. And then I don't mention it here because I don't have the formal data. It's mentioned in the report, but of course, shared housing is another source of affordable market rate rental housing for, particularly for individuals. And just from an informal Craigslist poll, we see it averaging between a range of $325 to $750 per room, including utilities for shared housing, average around $575. Again, very unscientific there, but definitely within reach of very low and some extremely low individuals for whom that's a good fit. So moving on to assisted housing, this is all still within that second section. Everett has a significant supply of assisted units, and here I'm pooling them to a couple different categories, which is explained in the profile, but it's just to get at these first two, it's just to differentiate between two different types of subsidies, or kinds of assistance, I should say. So the first, when I'm referring to subsidized units, these are units that receive some kind of ongoing financial assistance every month, so that the renters don't pay more than 30% of their income usually. So subsidizing the difference between 30% of their income and whatever the market rent may be. And then the workforce units, that is just referring to properties that have received some kind of upfront subsidy or one-time financial boost. And then in exchange for that, they have to keep rents at a certain level. But what you'll see in actual practice is, of course, because when you're building assisted housing, you've got to be really creative. Most of the housing providers will use a mixture of sources. And often you'll see in those workforce units, well, the term workforce might make you think one thing, they're often used to serve much lower income households, and then specialized households like seniors, people with disabilities. Moving back to Everett, 7,707 roughly assisted units between subsidized and workforce and your transitional and shelter units. Most of your subsidized units are in Section 8 vouchers, which is a federal program, and most of the subsidized programs are federal, where voucher holders can take their voucher to any private rental that will accept it and meets certain standards. So these are scattered throughout the community. But then 1,654 other units across 43 properties. Workforce units, 2,749 units across 37 properties. And then 85 transitional units in 6 properties. These are where the tenancy is time limited or limited to finishing some kind of a program. And then 334 shelter beds in 7 properties. So a really significant local supply. But at the same time, there are still 19,057 households below 50% AMI in the city. So, of course, the next question, what can we do? The intention of this report was just to start with the initial conditions. But I would echo as Dave said, the importance of the planning process and supporting affordability over the long term. While financial assistance to build units is really important, making sure that the proper framework is in place to support what the community needs over time is also essential. And then, of course, there are a range of options up to resource intensivity, short of actually becoming a housing provider. Just starting with working with various community partners, providing housing. And then as AHA moves forward, we're hopefully going to expand more of those opportunities, start looking into different funding options, all of that. So that's where we're going next year. And thanks for having me. Any questions? I'm ready now.
Questions from the commission?
Have you had any contact with Habitat for Humanity?
I haven't. That's where I've been this year, I've just been working, kind of getting these profiles out. That's our next step is starting to develop that that outer network. But is there a particular project you're thinking of,
Oh,
or?
well, I haven't been involved with it for quite a few years, but there's a set of homes that they did down at the bottom of 26th Street, right on Marine View, and they appear to be a very successful effort by that group. And I would certainly like to do whatever I could to promote that, in the city of Everett.
Great.
Yeah, we helped through our federal funding sources, we helped them with 2 different projects here in Everett, where we helped them purchase a house that had burnt down, and then a family built a house on that. And then in South Everett, there's 4 units off Broadway, which was Habitat for Humanity. So we helped, again, purchase the property, and then there's 4 families that built homes on that. So we've been involved with our federal funding sources with 5 units on 2 different locations. They have they have a new director in the last year, and they have their store on Broadway. That's been so successful that they opened another one in Linwood, and they also have their offices in Linwood now, where they were here located in Everett. So Habitat has been expanding, especially their store, and they are doing projects in other parts of the city. They don't have any in Everett right now, I don't think, but we have financially helped them purchase property, and then they built homes on those properties.
It's outstanding.
Thanks.
I have a couple quick questions. I appreciate the report. I think it's great, and I love the numbers and stuff. I think it gives us a lot of meat that we can work with. One of the questions I had is, obviously 2012 seems to be the most recent update in here. Do we have 2013 median home prices available at all?
I can get you the median home sale price in 2013. It's just not included because I couldn't do the affordability calculations because I was missing some of the average interest rates. But I can provide the average for 2013.
It'd be great if you could.
Yeah, I
I know
can
you
get
make the
that out
note
to you.
in the report that as that median price goes up, then we face more significant challenges from the affordability standpoint. So,
Yes.
and then the other thing I wanted to ask, and as I understand it from the Streets Initiative, because this issue came up, our median income, there's only one city in the entire county that has a lower median income than us, and that is Darrington, right? So from
Yes.
an affordability standpoint, we have a population with an extremely low median income and a fairly expensive median home price.
Yeah, that is correct, yeah. The average, and this is going off the census average, but I know the 2012 census average value is about 5 times the median household income, which I didn't mention this report, but that is a little higher than some other places. I think countywide, it's somewhere around 4 times the average. So, but yes, for home ownership, it is going to be a challenge for lots of households here.
Okay, and then the other quick question I have for you is, in the Alliance, we've started to talk a little bit about microhousing in the city of Everett because we had a student housing project that just came through. Have you seen any of the other member cities have discussions on microhousing and how it's impacting some of the numbers and statistics that you're looking at?
It's bubbled up in some places. Again, we're just getting to that level where we're starting to explore different options. But it has come up in that discussion of looking to how do we provide a greater diversity of housing options, especially in lots of cities where they don't have the smaller units.
Okay.
So
It's on the horizon.
it's on the horizon, yes.
Great.
But of course, quite controversial in a lot of places as well. So
Absolutely.
we'll get there.
I think the challenge is becoming creative. I mean, it doesn't have to be
Yes.
microhousing from my standpoint, but looking to see what other discussions are occurring out there. Because it just, as I understand it, I mean, to build a unit low-end or affordable or the most affordable you can build, and I think this comes from Ken Stark and, again, the Streets Initiative, but when you're talking about $250,000 from an investment standpoint, so looking for ways that we can create more affordable housing at a lower cost. So I guess I don't want to put the label microhousing on it, but is there any other discussions along those lines in terms of the Alliance?
I mean, in general, our focus is on getting costs down for development, absolutely. Of course, coming from the city perspective, finding ways to support developers, to make it easier to work within. But yes, talking about allowing different types of units is part of that conversation about keeping costs down.
Okay.
Yeah.
A popular one that I've heard is the container ship housing.
Oh, yeah.
Not container ship, but the container unit housing. Has that come up at all?
Not seriously, but I have heard of it before. I haven't talked about it with this group, but yeah, I have seen a lot of different models of how that can work. And
Okay.
yeah, it's been done in lots of interesting ways in different places.
Yeah. And the number that Ken Stark does is it's buying, land and building a property, from ground up. And with with state funding, or if you're involved with federal funding, there's a lot of strings that come with the money. With the state, they have what's called an evergreen standard, which is their own standard instead of LEED. The LEED standard is a private industry standard, but it costs you money to register that and have that reviewed. So the state came up with their own standard. So it's a higher standard for energy efficiency, and so there's a cost involved there, but in the long term, it's cheaper in the sense of energy costs. There is also labor wages that have to be paid and such, but all that, and paperwork that's involved, and so all that adds up to more costs. Now, we have, as a city, worked with the Everett Housing Authority in the past and purchased properties, and there's one that's out off of Madison. There was 20 units, and those were purchased from a private somebody wanted to sell them there privately, and that was about $70,000 a unit, and they were very rentable and very good units. So the housing authority's been able to pick up stuff in that range, and where it's apartment buildings, there are existing apartment buildings. They've been maintained to the point where they're just a move-in type thing, and so what they do is they go from a market rate housing to a housing where over time the housing authority is able to rent them for lower rent because of their financial sources and such. So in that case, that 20 units out there, we help the housing authority purchase that with some home funds, which was $500,000 for her, and $500,000 of public investment. We had 20 units of housing that are now more affordable. So there's other ways to do it. I mean, what Ken's numbers are: new construction, start from scratch, and pay an architect, pay a builder, and all the the profit that goes along with that and such, compared to just if you went out and bought some existing unit someplace.
Right. I think it's a great clarification. I guess the only problem, though, is under the scenario where you're buying the existing, we're still taking stock that's already affordable potentially, and we're just moving it over into the subsidized category at that point.
Well, you're just making it more affordable over time, anyway, so, yeah. I mean, they're able to keep the rents down and target a lower income. And as was mentioned here, the 50% of median income and above can find rental units here, that in theory they can afford. And if it's 30% or a median income or lower, that's where it's very deep subsidy. That's where people who are on Social Security or minimum income, are, so that's the tough one, because it's not just providing the housing, it's also providing some subsidy to it, so.
Okay, thanks, good clarification.
Help me make sure we understand this correctly. When we're talking about the income categories, we're using the regional numbers that include Bellevue and Seattle, right? Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about housing costs, we're using just local Everett data?
Thanks for clarifying. So the benchmarks I use to describe the population, those are derived from numbers that include King County and Snohomish. But when we're looking at rent data, that's just looking at what's the rent range in Everett. But then comparing it to those benchmark numbers. So for example, think the cutoff for extremely low income, averaging across household sizes around $26,000. So I'd say, okay, what's a 12th of that, a third of that, to estimate how much could is the maximum affordable rent on a monthly basis to an extremely low income household in theory, based on that benchmark. And then compare that to the rent numbers or the home sale prices in Everett to get a sense of what the percentage is that's affordable here. So the benchmarks are determined using standards that, yes, do not represent Snohomish County by any means. But we're looking at Snohomish County data. They're just benchmarks to divide the population into income groups for comparison.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know that one comes up a lot.
That helps
but-
to explain my shock upon first reading the early sections of the report and seeing that a significant percentage, the majority of the population was in the low income and lower categories in Everett. But the data is, if I may say so, skewed by the inclusion of Seattle and Bellevue income levels.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, better, but still, with regard to affordability, that also explains why our lower income residents seem to have an easier time finding housing until you get into the bottom two categories, and then
Yeah.
there's really no real straightforward way to meet the need.
Yeah, it's still, while that 50% seems to be, while at 50% AMI, that very low income cutoff seems to be high for Snohomish County, we still see that rents and home ownership not really being there to that income level, that things are still not affordable below that income level.
And then one nitpicky thing, Table 1.1 that presents the cost burden data
Yep.
and shows columns for renters in Everett and Snohomish County and owners in Everett and Snohomish County, and then all that averaged together. I think you want to take a look at the numbers in the very low category.
You're not adding up?
They don't, yeah, the all numbers are nowhere near the range presented by the individual renter and owner numbers for either Everett or Snohomish County.
Okay, I'll look at that. It may be skewing by, at those low income categories, you're going to have a lot more renters, of course, than homeowners. So it may be that the overall percentage is skewed by having a much larger population and
It still
one of
should
those,
fall somewhere
but-
in the range.
I'll check it out. Yeah, I'll take a look. Thanks. Anything else?
So I'm just, I guess, once we've compiled all this statistical data, that gives us a tool to basically set goals for housing goals, regionally. Is that kind of the sort of the gist or the thrust of all this?
Yeah. The intention with this is that this provides more information to support you as you're going through your housing element update process to, as you're revisiting those goals, to make sure they still make sense for your community moving forward. Just to provide more data and more evidence. And then as you're evaluating new policies as they come up, it's just to provide that data. Yes, thanks.
I think one thing that Chris sort of touched on a little bit is, we've obviously got this, the shame of having homeless families, in the U.S. and what is there something here that could help us to, get people off the street, and get them into a house or get them into a home? Could that be part of this, in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, that is going to be a really important focus. When you're starting to look at homelessness, that's where you're getting to really the much more service-intensive, really financially intensive. I mean, the goal here is, since this report is focused more on the income levels where they might be able to be reached in the private market, I would say the goal here is to look at how can we expand what's offered in the private market to reach as many households as possible, to minimize the amount that have to be subsidized, and then maximize the amount of funds available for homeless people, for people who need additional services, which those two groups are related. But yes, this report doesn't really touch on that to too much of a degree.
Okay.
But thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Okay, other comments before we take public comment? All right. I have a few people that have signed up to speak. Oh, sorry, thank you very much. And then I assume you're going to stick around in case we have more
Yeah.
questions? Okay, great, thank you.